The rain had been falling for 8 days without pause. Streets that once held laughter and the rhythm of market bells were now silent canals of dark, swirling water. The church on the hill Our Lady of Sorrows stood like a ghost in the mist, its doors shut against the rising flood. Inside, the air was damp and heavy with the scent of wet stone and candle wax. Father Aurelio stood before the altar, his cassock clinging to him like a second skin, his eyes red not from weeping, but from nights without sleep. He had watched his town crumble under the storm, had prayed until his knees burned. Yet the heavens gave no sign. People were leaving those who could still find boats. Those who remained came not for comfort, but for answers, and he had none. In the corner pew, Sister Magdalena sat with a rosary wrapped so tightly around her hand it left marks in her skin. She was the quiet one, the humble one, never in the spotlight, never speaking more than needed. But she had the gift of listening, the kind that made the hardest hearts break open. Across the aisle stood Mayor Lucio, his expensive coat dripping rain onto the marble floor. He had refused Father Aurelio's pleas for weeks, no church shelter, no public gathering for prayer. Hope doesn't stop water, he had said. Prayer doesn't rebuild walls. His pride was a shield, forged from years of politics and unspoken wounds. And then there was Isabella the stranger. She had arrived in the night, soaked to the bone, carrying nothing but a weathered candle in a tin holder. Her eyes were steady, her voice low. No one knew where she came from, but when she spoke, even the wind seemed to still. She said she was here for the people, not the place. She said she was here because the Virgin had told her to come. By the third morning, the church floor was slick with rainwater that seeped in under the heavy doors. Father Aurelio found himself snapping at a young boy who asked if God was angry with them. Shame hit him immediately, like cold water. He went to apologize, but the boy was already with Sister Magdalena, who knelt before him, whispering, "Sometimes the storm is not his anger, but his invitation." It happened that night. A group of townspeople had gathered reluctantly in the church, not for prayer, but because the last dry homes had been claimed by the flood. Mayor Lucio stood in the back, arms crossed, eyes avoiding Aurelio's. The rain outside was a constant roar, the candles shivering in the draft. Then the wind fell silent. Now lesson stopped. A stillness filled the space, so sudden it felt unnatural. And then, by the old cracked statue of the Virgin Mary near the side altar, light bloomed, not the flicker of candles, but a soft, living radiance that moved like breath. The broken plaster, the faded blue robe, it seemed to mend before their eyes. And then they saw her face. She was not the cold marble virgin of the statue. She was alive, yet not earthly. Her gaze moved over them not with pity, but with a love so fierce it was almost unbearable. Father Aurelio fell to his knees, tears streaming freely now. Sister Magdalena whispered the Hail Mary so softly it felt like a heartbeat. The boy clung to her side. Mayor Lucio stood frozen, trembling, his mouth opening and closing like a man trying to remember how to speak. Isabella was not surprised. She simply stepped forward and placed her candle at the Virgin's feet. And then the voice came not out loud, but in their hearts. "Do not be afraid of the silence. It is where you will hear me, and when you leave here, carry my light not in your hands, but in your lives." When the light faded, the air was heavy again with rain, but the sound was no longer a roar, it was a rhythm. Outside, the water had begun to recede. Days later, when the church doors opened to the sun, the town began to rebuild. Not all believed what they had seen. Some said it was grief, or exhaustion, or trick of light. But Father Aurelio knew the truth, not because he could prove it, but because something inside him had changed. He found Mayor Lucio one afternoon, hammer in hand, repairing the church steps. "I was wrong," the mayor said quietly. "Hope does stop water if it's the kind that lives in the heart." Sister Magdalena kept her place in the pews, quietly guiding those who came seeking peace. The boy she had comforted now helped her light candles. Isabella disappeared as suddenly as she had come, leaving only the old tin candle holder on the altar. And every evening, as the sun set and the bell tolled, Father Aurelio would stand before the restored statue of the Virgin, feeling that fierce, unshakable gaze still upon him. The church was no longer just a shelter from the rain. It was, as the Virgin had said, a light to be carried in their lives. The flood had not come all at once. It had begun with a week of heavy rain that everyone assumed would pass, as it always did. But by the fourth day, the river had swallowed its banks, creeping up narrow streets, swallowing gardens, and tugging at doors with a hungry pull. Sound of water was constant, a low, endless murmur, like something whispering just below the surface of the earth. It was not the violent crashing of waves, but the slow persistence of a force that did not tire. Father Aurelio had walked the streets in those early days, his cassock soaked, his boots sinking into the softening ground. He visited homes, prayed with families, blessed doorways, and carried bread to those stranded. But with each passing day, his visits turned shorter, not because his faith was fading, but because he began to realize the people weren't looking at him the same way. Their eyes held questions he couldn't answer. Will it stop? Why hasn't God helped? Is this a punishment? Every time, he felt the sting of not knowing. Inside Our Lady of Sorrows, the air smelled of damp incense and extinguished candles. The choir loft was silent. Once, the choir had been the pride of the parish, voices rising like sunlight on a winter morning, but now even the music seemed to have fled the town. Sister Magdalena moved quietly through the pews, drying benches with cloths and collecting the wax from melted candles. She was small, unassuming, her hair tucked neatly under her veil. Many in the town underestimated her because she never raised her voice. But Aurelio knew that her silence was not weakness. She had a depth that unsettled people, not because she spoke much, but because when she did, it was as if she had been listening to the world for years before answering. The mayor, Lucio Ferrani, was another matter. He had been born in the town but had spent most of his life elsewhere in the capital, in offices that smelled of polished wood and cigars, surrounded by men who valued results more than compassion. When the flood began, he approached it like any other crisis: calculations, budgets, resources. Churches were not part of his plan. We can't waste time on superstition, he told Aurelio in their first meeting. We need sandbags, not sermons. And then came Isabella. She arrived on the 5th night, when the rain was falling in sheets so heavy it blurred the world into a moving wall of water. Aurelio was locking the church when he saw her, a slim figure, dark hair plastered to her cheeks, holding a small tin candle holder like it was the most precious thing in the world. She said nothing at first, only stepped inside and knelt before the altar. When she did speak, her voice was like stone dropped into still water, soft, but rippling through the space. I came because she called me, she said simply. Who? Aurelio asked, though he already knew. Our Lady. Aurelio wanted to believe her, but part of him, a part tired from days of carrying too many burdens, hesitated. People claimed visions before. Sometimes they were desperate, sometimes they were deceived. But Isabella's gaze was steady, without demand. She didn't ask to be believed. By the 7th day, the church was no longer a place for prayer, it was a refuge. Families huddled together on blankets, listening to the rain drum against the roof. A small fire burned in an old iron brazier, its smoke curling up into the rafters. Children slept in the aisles. Mayor Lucio stood near the entrance, still refusing to join in prayer circles. But Aurelio noticed he never left the church entirely. Pride kept him at the door, but something else, perhaps fear, kept him from walking away. That evening, Aurelio found Sister Magdalena speaking with a young boy named Matteo. The child was clutching a wooden cross on a string, his eyes wide. Is God angry with us? Matteo asked. Before Aurelio could answer, Magdalena spoke. Sometimes the storm is not his anger, but his invitation. The boy tilted his head. Invitation to what? To see what matters most when everything else is washed away. It was just before midnight when it happened. The rain, which had been a constant roar, faded into silence. Not a gradual softening. One moment it was there, the next it was gone. The air inside the church felt charged, as if every breath was part of something larger. The candles flickered, but did not go out. Near the side altar stood the old statue of the Virgin Mary, Our Lady of Sorrows. It had been in the church for over a century, and years of damp had cracked its plaster. The paint was faded, the robes blue, almost gray, but now a glow began to gather around it, soft at first, like moonlight, then brighter, as though the light came from within the statue itself. Gasps filled the church. Some fell to their knees, others clutched one another. Mayor Lucio stood frozen, his hand half raised, as if reaching for something he could not name. Aurelio felt his heart pounding, his eyes filling without permission. He knew this was not a trick of the light. This was something sacred, something that could undo a man entirely.